Hi everyone, in this video I'm going to show you how to make the Jutta skirt for your door. This is a very quick project, and I think that's a 20-minute skirt. I think it's also 30 to 40 minutes for your girl. I can sew them in half an hour. They are very quick, so you can make them for your girl and for the door. It's got a very simple wrap over here. Now I've actually put in a button, right, and a buttonhole, but you could do it with cam snaps as well, and then velcro on the other side. Very simple wrap over, a little bit of elastication in the back. It hasn't got an awful lot of elastication actually. It fits rather snugly, which I think is quite nice. I have already prepared everything, and we're going to look first at what we need to make this. There's only a few pieces.
This skirt only has 2 pattern pieces, and on the facing we have a marking for the center front, so when the skirt overlaps we get that lovely wrap skirt, you see, and then the back is held in with some elastic. It's very simple. To prepare your facing, what you want to do is serge either side and the lower edge, and we leave the top edge as is. And then we have the skirt. You can see the dotted line here. We're going to fold over the skirt and have an integrated facing on either side. And then we also have the marking here as above for the center front, but then this marking here is where we're going to put the tunnel and the elastic. And again, we're going to serge the sides and the hem. The elastic has a width of 2 centimeters, 0.8 inches, and a length of 13 centimeters, and that is just over 2 inches. Our first step is to sew the facing to the skirt. So if you put the center back on top of each other from both the facing and the skirt, you'll notice that the facing is actually shorter than the skirt, because don't forget, it folds over. So what you want to do first is lift over the facing onto the edge of the skirt, and we're going to sew that in, and we do that on the other side as well. And when we finish the sewing, those sides will fold in, the seam will face into the skirt, and we can then also sew along the waist. Very simple method, which is the same as for the girl's skirt. So if you can sew this, you can sew the girl's skirt too. 1 centimeter seam allowance. Don't forget to lock in your stitches at the beginning and the end, and we do the same on the other side as well. I love this skirt. Many of you have asked me if I've still got fabric left or where I got this fabric, and unfortunately it is gone. It was from a market trader and I bought as much as he had, and I've used it a ton of times and it's all gone. Sorry. Anyway, now we fold over as I just explained, and now we're going to sew along the waist. You can do that foot width or with a centimeter seam allowance. That tiny little bit doesn't make a lot of difference on a girl's skirt or a doll's skirt, doesn't really matter. Don't forget to take the pin out. Have the rough edges right on top of each other. And sew all the way to the end, lock in your stitches. Brilliant. Excellent. Next step, take your scissor and cut back the seam allowance. Here I've already done it, and across a little bit, and then you also want to just trim that back. You could snip it. I think it's a bit visible here that I snipped it first, and I thought, well, you don't really need to do that, just cut it back to about 3 millimeters. And now we're going to sew the facing to the hem, basically both sides. So centimeter seam allowance all the way across. Da-da-dum. And then we'll also understitch. Again, we're going to sew the facing to the seam allowance, and we do that all in this step. So once over, same on the other side. Brilliant. And while we're at the sewing machine, we do the understitching. Understitching is ever so important because it does give you a much nicer edge. Do you have to do this? No, you could just go now and press it, but it will make your life much easier, and it looks so much nicer. So you go as far as you can. You pull apart the facing and the main part of the skirt, and then you stitch on the facing side close to the edge. Stitch length 3.5. Can be a slightly longer stitch because it's going to be visible, not from the outside but from the inside. Lock in your stitches, and now we can just press the whole lot, turn it all, and then also iron up the hem a centimeter. You can see I've already done it here, and we're at the next step where we're going to put the tunnel in for our elastic, which I've cut to the right length, and I've also marked where my tunnel has to be. All of that is on your pattern. You can see now what the pattern looks like underneath it, and we're just going to sew along this dotted line. You could also turn it in a little bit if you haven't got an overlock and you don't want zigzag, and then stitch along there. You could do that as well, of course. Next, we want to put the Velcro on. So if I overlap the fronts, I need to just see where that Velcro needs to go here. And incidentally, it's just right next to your marking for the tunnel anyway. So there's no need to measure this really, just put it right next to the mark for the tunnel. But the side that's going over the other side, we only sew it to the facing, so it's not visible from the outside, like that. Magic, already done. And now we're going to do the other side, and that just sits on the edge really. Again, you don't need to measure anything there. You just place the other part of your rectangle or little square little Velcro piece on there and sew it through all the layers on the outside of the skirt, so that now the Velcro holds together. The last thing we need to do is then to just put the button on. But before we do, we're going to do the top stitching now. First, we're going to do our tunnel. And we start exactly on our mark. And I'm sewing just above my serging. You can sew on it, or, you know, if you've turned it in, you would be very close to the edge. And while I'm here, I'm also sewing down the front. So all I do is go straight down. It's about 1.5 centimeters from the edge, but basically you want to be on your serging line. Turn and then sew your hem as well. And again, I sew right through the center of that serged edge, right? So what you don't want to have is be too close to the folded in edge of your hem. You want to be closer to the top edge, as close as you can go really. So when you get to the other end, you want to have the needle in the fabric, lift the presser foot, turn and sew all the way up. And we're done. Brilliant. Now I'm going to thread through my elastic. Put a safety pin in the end and thread it through. Now the important thing when you thread through the elastic is that on either side we have a little bit showing, so that we can then sew on that from the waistline down, so that it's fixed in, right? So I'm very careful. Oh, almost too much here, so I'll pull this out a little bit again, and then I'm going to put a pin in to keep that in place. I don't put it directly on the mark, I put it over a little bit to the left here, so that I can put my sewing machine straight on there, and I don't need to remove the pin when I'm sewing that into place. I'll do the same on the other side. I go all the way through, take out the safety pin. Brilliant. Wonderful. And let it just slide in a little bit more. Wonderful. And now I'm going to take a pin, and again I go over a little bit. I don't go on the line that's there, so that I can now go on the sewing machine, sew from the top to that point and to the edges. So lock in your stitches, go down so that you line up with the previous line of the tunnel if you can, and then go all the way to the edge. And repeat the same thing then obviously on the other side. So we start again at the top of the waistband, and we go down until we line up with the previous stitching. So it will actually look as if you've done it all in one, and it looks really, really nice. All the way to the end. Brilliant. All in. So the last thing we have to do now is the fastening. So you could use more Velcro, or could have used more Velcro, or a snap button, or anything you have, or cam snap. I'm going to put in a buttonhole just because I think with doll clothes you can practice a little bit. And it's not a disaster if it doesn't come out right. So let's just go through how you do your buttonhole. Take the button and make sure that the button looks good on what's right for you and for this skirt. So if it's a smaller button, it will sit in a different position to a bigger button, right? You don't want the button to hang over the edge. You want it to be off the edge a little bit. And from the top, you want to have the buttonhole inserted 1.2 centimeters from the top at least. Yeah, and you want that little gap at the top as well. And just put that back on. So you have a gap from either side, and I'm also marking now the horizontal line where my buttonhole is going to sit. So very simple. I put my button into my buttonhole foot and put it on the machine. Electronic machines do this really well. Not all of them, but most of them do. So they give you the perfect length of the buttonhole already. Always do a sample buttonhole just to check the length. When I did sewing courses in Worcestershire, I found that with my genomes, I had a ton of genomes for my students, that the buttonholes always came out way longer than they should have been for the buttons. And I took the button out and I used to push it a little bit more down so the buttonhole was shorter. So you want to check the length and make sure that it's only about 3 millimeters longer than your actual button, yeah? That's the maximum. Now, at the front here, I have a problem immediately because we have got the seam where we have the integrated facing and the facing for the waistline hitting each other, and my machine just didn't know what to do, so it just kept sewing. This is really annoying, and I thought, well, that's not right. Look at this. So I had to unpick it, and I thought, well, I can't obviously start from there. My machine can't handle it. So I'm using my sample buttonhole. Yeah, I just folded that over so I could see where it starts and ends. And I marked that now on the skirt so I know where my buttonhole has to end. And because that area is much flatter, I can sew from there to the front, and that will get rid of that problem. So if you have the issue that your machine can't handle it in the other direction because there's too much fabric, too much going on with seams and stuff, then start where it's simple and work your way back. And like I said, you could just put a cam snap in this. It is doll clothes, but if you've, oops, look, there's a pin, take that out. If you've not done a lot of buttonholes, then this is really great. You could practice your buttonholes here. And make sure that everything is nice and straight. The sensor is down, and you've got a little bit of a gap to the left of the presser foot. You can see that, right? That's the distance from the top. and it worked really well. You can see it's going over that heavier part of the skirt where we've got the two facings hitting each other, and it was no problem at all. So now all I have to do is sew on my button and, most importantly, cut open my buttonhole. And the way I do it is I fold it over, snip it, and then cut into either side. There we go. And then to the other side. If you're using a seam ripper, be very, very careful. Make sure you have a pin horizontally across the end of your buttonhole so that if you slip, it doesn't rip your whole fabric. I mean, that just happens so easily. Now, one thing, if you've never sewn on a button before and this is your first time, you want to do up your little skirt, and the buttonhole position is always determined by the far corner of your buttonhole. So go all the way to the end there and then go through, and that's where the button will have to sit. The other thing with buttons is that you always want to have a gap between the button and the fabric that you're sewing the button to, in this case a skirt, so that when you do up the button, it doesn't look like it's forcing the top layer down. So you want to do it so there is enough space between the button and the fabric for another layer of fabric, right? So I'll go through 3-4 times, you know. I think also this is quite nice if a child is practicing doing up buttons. Of course, door close is also good for that, right? So you wrap around from the top to the bottom, and that creates that beautiful little stem, like a little mushroom. So it will stand nice and firm. Cut it off. Let's see again, so you can see the distance here. Yeah, it's quite a good bit. It's quite a lot actually. And then I do it up and it looks like the button floats on the top.
And there we go, we finished the Jutta skirt, and you're probably saying, well, that's not the Jutta skirt. Well, this is the jacket that comes with it as a combo, which is the Dakota coat. And you've got the Jutta skirt underneath it, which is quite cool, right? It's really, really cute. And I just wanted to put it on for you so you can see what comes with it. But if I put it on from the start, you can't actually see it, can you? You don't know what you know, it's underneath. So yeah, it comes with a skirt, but actually this is the other part of the combo, which is the beautiful coat, and I think that's really, really nice. Now, I made the coat a little bit easier as well for you guys. There's no real pockets in there, but for the Jutta skirt, I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you come back, and if you liked it, please, if you're watching from YouTube, comment, like, ping that little bell so you get notified when the next video drops. And yep, I'll see you next time for another project, which is this little jacket here. Bye for now.